Demi Moore has stayed silent for years, but at 62, she's finally telling the truth about Ashton Kutcher, and it's jaw-dropping. Their marriage looked glamorous from the outside, but behind closed doors, Moore was living a very different reality. Now she's revealing the moments that shattered her, the secrets she carried, and the truth she never dared say out loud. What she just confessed will leave fans absolutely gasping. When Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher first crossed paths in 2003, the encounter felt almost mythic in its timing. Moore, emerging from emotional wreckage after her divorce from Bruce Willis and years of public scrutiny, had reached a point in life where reinvention felt both necessary and fragile. Kutcher, meanwhile, was the charismatic, fast-rising actor whose career was fueled by youthful energy and an image of effortless humor. The moment they met, Moore later wrote, "He lit up a part of me I thought had died." Their connection, instant and visually striking, became a Hollywood talking point before they even went public. By the time they married on September 24, 2005, the fascination had grown into a media frenzy. The 16-year age gap became the defining headline. Moore, about 42, and Kutcher, about 26, stood as a rare inversion of the industry's usual dynamics, where older men regularly paired with younger women. Their romance challenged expectations, and for a short time it seemed to work. The couple projected a sleek, modern glamour that magazines devoured. The sculpted red carpet appearances, the seemingly effortless blending of their lives, and the unusual family portrait that included Bruce Willis, who remained on friendly terms with Moore and regularly appeared at events with the pair. But behind the sheen, Moore later wrote, she saw the relationship as more than a love story. She saw it as a rebirth. In her memoir Inside Out, she reflected candidly on how she entered the marriage hoping for renewal, stability, and a second chapter she felt she desperately needed. With Kutcher, she said, she believed she had found a partner who brought back the sense of youth and possibility she feared she had lost. He made her feel funny, alive, and worth loving again, she wrote, revealing just how emotionally charged the bond had become for her. At the time, Kutcher embraced the unconventional role of stepfather to Moore's 3 daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, and publicly spoke of how deeply he cared for them. Their household operated with a kind of blended family ease that further fed the public's fascination. To many observers, the pairing seemed improbable yet curiously magnetic. A relationship built on contrasts, experience and innocence, reinvention and ascension, fragility and buoyancy. Yet Moore's reflections reveal how much of her identity she invested in the partnership. She framed the marriage as her chance to rewrite her personal narrative, to move beyond the trauma of her past, the pressures of longevity in Hollywood, and the fear that she had already lived her most meaningful years. Kutcher represented possibility, hope, and a new emotional beginning. And for a time, she believed that was enough. That's right. The early image of Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher as a radiant, boundary-breaking Hollywood couple eventually gave way to one of the most painful chapters of Moore's life. In her memoir, Moore stripped away the glamour and revealed the emotional devastation that defined their marriage behind closed doors. At the center of that pain was a tragedy she had kept private for years, a late-term pregnancy loss. Moore became pregnant early in the relationship and, filled with hope about building a family with Kutcher, began fertility treatments to increase their chances. But around the 6-month mark, she miscarried. The loss shattered her. She described holding on to the name they had chosen, Chaplain Ray, as a reminder of the future they had imagined but would never have. The miscarriage sent Moore into a spiral, one intensified by the pressure she felt to be the youthful, carefree partner she believed Kutcher wanted. As she processed the grief, she made a decision she later deeply regretted. She returned to alcohol after more than a decade of sobriety. The relapse, she wrote, was not simply about the drink itself, but about the deeper emotional erosion she was experiencing. She felt herself becoming smaller within the relationship, bending to what she believed were Kutcher's expectations, and suppressing the fear that she was failing as both a partner and a woman. Moore's account of her addiction struggles during this period is stark. She described how the dynamic with Kutcher, his youth, his worldview, and his attitudes toward monogamy, fed a destructive cycle of self-doubt. She wanted to be the cool, accommodating wife, the one who never appeared insecure or threatened. In trying to maintain that image, she crossed boundaries she never thought she would. One of those boundaries was her choice to participate in threesomes, which Moore disclosed with unflinching honesty. She explained that the decision was rooted not in desire, but in an attempt to keep her marriage intact. She believed that saying yes would make her more desirable, more open, more aligned with what she thought Kutcher wanted. Instead, the aftermath left her with what she later described as deep shame. She realized she had violated her own values in an effort to preserve a relationship that was already eroding. Moore wrote that Kutcher later used those experiences to rationalize his own behavior. In one of the most quoted lines from Inside Out, she recalled, "Because we had brought a third party into our relationship," Ashton said, "that blurred the lines and, to some extent, justified what he's done." The statement cut her to the core. It reframed her vulnerability and self-sacrifice as a form of permission. Permission she never intended to give. For Moore, it became the moment she understood how far she had drifted from herself. By the time November 2011 arrived, the cracks in Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher's marriage were no longer private fissures. They had become pressure fractures visible to the entire world. Years of grief, emotional distance, and public scrutiny had accumulated quietly but relentlessly. When Moore finally announced their separation, her statement carried a controlled, diplomatic tone, but between the lines lay exhaustion, heartbreak, and the recognition that the marriage she had once believed would be her renewal had reached an irreversible breaking point. The announcement landed with shockwaves across Hollywood. For years, their carefully curated image, stylish, modern, united, had seemed unshakable. Even amid rumors of infidelity and tension, many believed they would somehow stabilize. Instead, Moore's declaration marked the beginning of a long and painful unwinding of their life together. Kutcher, whose public persona had always leaned toward humor and lightness, went noticeably silent in the immediate aftermath. Behind the scenes, the distance between them had become too vast to navigate, and by December 2012, Kutcher formally filed for divorce. The legal process itself was not rushed. Though compromise eventually emerged, the emotional weight of their history lingered over every step. The dissolution was finalized in November 2013, closing a chapter that had once seemed destined to reshape Hollywood's idea of what a marriage could look like. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about mismatched expectations, emotional fragility, and the pressure cooker of public life. When Kutcher later reflected on the breakup, his comments were unusually raw for someone who rarely addressed his private turmoil. He admitted openly that the divorce hit him with a force he hadn't anticipated. In one of his most candid statements, he confessed, "Nothing makes you feel like a failure like divorce. Divorce feels like a wholesale failure." It was a striking admission, not defensive, not revised for PR, but an acknowledgement of the profound personal reckoning he endured. Despite the narrative that he had moved on quickly, Kutcher later made clear that the end of his marriage to Moore dismantled parts of him he had never known were fragile. He described feeling gutted, unmoored, and confronted by his own shortcomings in ways that forced him into uncomfortable self-examination. For Moore, the aftermath was equally complex. She faced not only the end of a deeply invested love, but also the task of rebuilding herself from the spiritual and emotional ground up. The dissolution forced her to confront every compromise, every lost boundary, Every moment she had tried to be someone she wasn't in pursuit of love and validation. Public fascination with their age gap and celebrity status had once made them seem almost impervious to normal relational strain. But the quiet truth that emerged after their split was far more human. Two people, both deeply wounded in different ways, leaving a marriage that neither had known how to save. The finalization of their divorce marked the end of a public saga. But for both Moore and Kutcher, the real work began only after the papers were signed. When Demi Moore released her memoir Inside Out in 2019, it marked a turning point not only in her public narrative, but in her personal reckoning. For years, the darkest parts of her marriage to Ashton Kutcher had been shielded behind a veneer of Hollywood glamour. The memoir shattered that facade. With unflinching candor, Moore laid out the complex emotional architecture of a relationship that had once promised rebirth, but ultimately dismantled her from the inside. One of the book's most striking revelations was her admission of an alcohol relapse, a return to drinking after more than a decade of sobriety. Moore explained that the emotional weight of their relationship, the longing to feel desired, the pressure to embody a youthful, carefree ideal, eroded her resolve. Her relapse was not presented as a single moment of weakness, but as the result of cumulative emotional strain, grief, and internalized expectations. The miscarriage, which had already hollowed out her sense of stability, deepened the spiral. The memoir also confronted one of the most publicly debated aspects of their breakup: Kutcher's alleged infidelity. Moore stopped short of sensationalism, but she was direct. She described situations in which she believed lines had been crossed, moments where she felt dismissed, betrayed, and ultimately destabilized. For Moore, the issue was not simply the action itself, but the broader pattern: how certain behaviors made her question her worth, her role, and her trust in the relationship. Moore also addressed their sexual experimentation, including threesomes, with a tone of reflective regret. She emphasized that she never pursued these experiences out of desire, but out of fear of seeming old-fashioned, insecure, or insufficient. She wanted to be the cool partner who never imposed limits, but instead, she wrote, she sacrificed boundaries she should have protected. The emotional fallout was profound. Moore described a deep sense of shame that lingered long after the experiences themselves, calling them decisions made against her own inner compass. And the grief surrounding the miscarriage, the loss of the child they had named Chaplain Ray, remained a wound that shaped every stage of their marriage. In Inside Out, Moore finally articulated how that loss intersected with the gradual unraveling of their bond. It was a trauma she carried alone for years, believing that speaking openly about it would expose vulnerabilities she didn't know how to face. Yet the memoir was not written in bitterness. One of its most surprising lines was Moore's expression of gratitude toward Kutcher. "I'm grateful to Ashton, too, believe it or not. Whatever pain we went through together enabled both of us to grow into the people we are today." It was a statement that reframed the entire narrative, not as an indictment, but as an acknowledgement of shared humanity. She recognized that the relationship, despite the heartbreak, had served as a catalyst for profound personal evolution. In a concurrent interview, when asked why she chose to reveal these truths after years of silence, Moore distilled her motivation into a single piercing line. The fundamental question was, how did I get here? That question became the engine of Inside Out. It wasn't a book written to assign blame. It was a book written to understand. Moore sought to trace the path from childhood trauma to fame to love to loss that ultimately led her to reclaim her identity. By pulling back the curtain on her marriage to Kutcher, she finally found clarity, closure, and the ability to move forward without carrying the weight of unspoken pain. By January 2023, more than a decade had passed since the finalization of their divorce. Yet the shadow of Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher's marriage continued to resurface in the cultural conversation. When Kutcher sat down for an interview with Esquire, he addressed, more directly than ever, the emotional whiplash he felt when Moore's memoir Inside Out exploded into headlines in 2019. He did not sugarcoat his reaction. He admitted that when the book dropped, he was fecking pissed. For Kutcher, the anger wasn't simply about the revelations themselves. It was about the aftermath. The memoir reignited global media scrutiny, resurrected decade-old narratives, and dragged his past into the spotlight at a moment when he was intensely protective of his new family life with Mila Kunis and their children. He described feeling blindsided by the renewed attention, paparazzi outside his home, tabloids dissecting Moore's quotes, and online speculation about his past conduct. For someone who had spent years reconstructing his public image and building a quieter domestic existence, the sudden surge of scrutiny felt invasive. Yet the interview also revealed a more reflective Kutcher, one willing to revisit the emotional complexity of his earlier years with Moore. He spoke with unusual vulnerability about becoming a stepfather in his 20s to Moore's daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, and how profoundly the role shaped him. He described stepping into a ready-made family as a formative, identity-defining experience that pushed him to grow up faster than his peers. The responsibility, the affection, the fragile balance of blending lives, all of it, he said, left an imprint that he still carries. Despite the painful ending of the marriage, he acknowledged that his relationship with the girls had been one of the most meaningful chapters of his young adulthood. Meanwhile, Moore has maintained a measured, restrained posture in the years since the memoir's release. She has not pursued a second wave of exposés or a worldwide promotional cycle revisiting every detail. Instead, she has offered occasional, carefully chosen reflections in interviews, magazine features, and public appearances, moments where she contextualizes her past without relitigating it. These comments often tie her relationship with Kutcher to broader themes of self-worth, boundaries, and personal evolution, emphasizing the internal work she undertook after the dissolution of their marriage. Moore's post-memoir messaging has been consistent. She is willing to speak about the past, but only in ways that relate to her healing rather than sensationalism. She has not given a new global tell-all, nor has she sought to escalate the dialogue. Instead, she uses brief, reflective observations to underline how the relationship and its collapse forced her into deeper clarity about who she is, what she values, and what she will no longer compromise. What do you think about Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.